We all enjoy exploring the lesser traveled parts of our country, and for many of us, a big part of that exploration involves off road travel. With the exploding popularity of overlanding, how do we ensure the preservation of the places we enjoy for our children and for theirs? That's what today's episode is about, so stay tuned. Hello and welcome. My wife Susan and we're on a mission to explore the byways of this country to find the food, the people, and even the odd stuff. We're exploring where the roads lead after you leave the interstates behind, and beyond where the roads end. Whether you're thinking about getting started overlanding or rocking a fully built rig, I'll be talking about the places we go and giving tips to make your journeys go smoother. And it all starts now on this episode of The Dirt Road Tourist. This episode is dropping on the day before New Year's Eve, and I want to talk a little about resolutions. I suppose it's only natural that our thoughts turn to the making of resolutions in the waning days of December. I mean, here we are at the dawn of a new year with all the memories of the year behind us, but also the regrets over opportunities not realized, adventures unexplored due to the exigencies of day to day life. And this is balanced against the plans, the potential, the possibilities of a fresh start laid out before us. We resolve to get to the gym, to lose weight. We resolve to work harder, to work less, to quit drinking, to take up a hobby. We make all manner of bargains with ourselves that won't see the light of February. One resolution that all of us who enjoy overlanding and exploring the outdoors can and should commit to is to be better stewards of the outdoor spaces we like to frequent. There are a wide variety of ways in which we can be better protectors, to be more involved in the preservation of our natural spaces, and I'm going to talk about a few of them on today's episode. If you've been doing overlanding for any amount of time, you've probably been involved in a discussion with friends about trail closures because we've seen quite a few of them over the past few years. And there are a number of reasons why we're seeing so many of these trail closures. One of them is that overlanding really took off during the pandemic. There were a lot of people that got into overlanding because it was one of the few safe things that you could do because it was outdoors. It involved being separate from other people and kind of getting out on your own. So a lot of people bought camping equipment. They rigged out their vehicles and got ready to go out into doing this. Another reason why people were led out into the outdoors was an explosion of social media channels. There were a ton of YouTube channels that were getting really ramped up for the overlanding space. They were showing a lot of the trips that they were taking and the places that they were going, and it looked like something that was fun to do during a time when there was not a whole lot of fun stuff to do. And all this greatly increased the traffic on what was previously little used trails and routes. Also, many of the people that were being brought in by the lure of the YouTube channels and the Instagrammers were not seasoned off-roaders when they got started into this. So they just had picked up a 4x4 vehicle. Let's throw a bunch of camping gear in it or on it and on it. And let's just get out here and go do it. And a lot of the social media type apps were not really geared towards teaching these people who are new to overlanding how to do it responsibly and how to do it sustainably. So bombing through mud holes, doing recoveries, getting stuck, flexing over these massive obstacles, it makes for dramatic and entertaining content out there, but it's not necessarily how we want newcomers to be starting off their overlanding time doing this stuff. And it wasn't teaching a really good way of being a steward for the trails that we get out there. There were quite a few people who were getting their start in overlanding without learning anything about leave no trace principles or even just general trail etiquette. And a lot of people who have been active in off-roading and overlanding for a while started talking about how they're seeing a rapid increase in trail degradation, campsites that are trashed, garbage along the trails, and we've seen a rapid increase in the number of trail closures over the past few years. So, one of the biggest trail closure bombs to hit in the past couple of years was the indefinite closure of about 350 miles of popular off road trails in Moab, Utah. This had become an incredibly popular place to visit for overlanders, new and old alike. People would watch videos of the spectacular scenery and the challenging trails, and they wanted to go out and do what they just watched their channel hosts do. The additional traffic led to severe erosion on and around these trails, which led to safety concerns, a lot of additional cost to taxpayers to clean up and maintain popular camping sites throughout the area. The erosion of the trail system also left them even more vulnerable. So eventually, the environmentalists are going to win this kind of an argument. And I don't want to paint this as an environmentalists versus off roaders war, but there are situations where we make the closure of popular trail systems a pretty easy decision to make. And those trails are gone. They're not open for overlanders to use and enjoy now. So we really have to ask ourselves, how are we going to make what we do sustainable? And how do we do this in a way which ensures that other people and ourselves can continue to go out and experience these places going forward? Some other examples of ways in which we, as overlanders, are threatening our own access to our favorite spots is ignoring closures for sensitive habitats, like in the California Desert Conservation Area, where illegal off road activity leads to disruption of desert tortoise habitats, vehicle noise creating disruptions to nesting areas, trail braiding, which is the practice of creating a shortcut or bypass off an existing trail to get past an obstacle that someone's vehicle maybe not be able to get over. And rather than turn around and backtrack, they'll just whip off through an area of undisturbed habitat and create a new trail. And this, by the way, is one of the fastest ways to get a trail shut down. Running trails when they're muddy. I know I'm going to piss off a lot of the hardcore off road crowd by saying it. These people live for finding mud out there and getting stuck in it. And having to perform a recovery is just the best way to ensure that there are stories to tell when they get back home. But when the trails are soft, it really increases the damage that a vehicle does to the surface, and getting stuck and doing a recovery only ratchets it up further. Tell you what, when you're driving off road, picture there being 500 rigs lined up behind you, and every one of those vehicles is going to drive the trail exactly like you go through. What's that trail going to look like when everyone is passed? I know I'm not going to change any hearts and minds out there for people who are really into this stuff. But if I can steer the ship a few degrees for people who are just getting into this, it might make a difference. Getting happy with the chainsaw. Clearing even dead standing trees, whether it's to create a path for one of those aforementioned bypasses or to gather some firewood, is something that Park Service employees find all too often. This is another one of those things where you think that what you're doing isn't having that much of an impact, and maybe it isn't. But when you picture the next few hundred people who visit this area doing exactly what you're doing, what does that place end up looking like? I mean, a lot of this is common sense, but if you get out into these forest trails with any frequency, you don't need me to tell you that we really need a lot more common sense out there for us to still have a chance to be doing this in 20 years. Okay, enough beating us over the head here, Ken. What do you think we should be doing to make things better out there, or at least not make things worse? Well, there's an organization for that. It's called Tread Lightly, and they've developed a set of principles for sustainable off-roading. I will, by the way, be including links to Tread Lightly and the other organizations I talk about during this episode in the show notes, so look down there for the links, and I highly recommend visiting these sites and check out what they have to offer. So, about those principles, they're organized into the word TREAD, T R E A D, and they go like this: travel responsibly, which means to stay on designated routes, especially in fragile environments like deserts or alpine areas. Avoid muddy or unstable terrain to reduce damage. So, an example of this is in Sedona. People staying on the marked trails has preserved the beauty of the Red Rock landscape, even with increased off road traffic. This is stuff that, everybody we know that it works when people are actually doing it. So, the more people we can get to observe some of these principles, even with increased traffic, even with more people wanting to get out and do this stuff, we can actually preserve the trails that we like to travel on and ensure that we're able to continue using them. The next one is the R, respect the rights of others. And that's to be mindful of hikers, mountain bikers, horseback riders, other trail users. You want to keep your noise levels down and yield when necessary. And an example of this is that trail sharing etiquette in places like the George Washington National Forest ensures that both off roaders and horseback riders enjoy the space safely. The E is educate yourself. You want to know the regulations and trail closures before you go. You want to use maps and GPS to ensure that you stay within approved areas. So Gaia and Onyx, they both provide information on things like seasonal closures of trails, trails that are closed. They give you overlays for public and private land to make sure that you're not actually driving onto private property. They have overlays that will show you whenever there's a forest fire in the area or something that you need to avoid. A lot of these modern mapping apps can help you avoid getting out there into a situation where you're actually endangering access for a trail for the rest of us and yourself, but also to make sure that you're getting out there safely and that you're not causing a whole lot of damage in these environments. Also, many state and national parks have apps or websites that provide up to date info on trail conditions, closures, and seasonal concerns. The A is avoid sensitive areas. You want to steer clear of wetlands, meadows, and wildlife nesting areas. You want to follow local guidelines during wildlife mating or migration seasons. I know that there is an area that was off limits temporarily up in the Pisgah National Forest about a year or so ago. And this was for peregrine falcon nesting area that they had up at Little Lost Cove Cliffs. And they had set that as kind of off limits while that nesting was going on. Another example in Utah's, and I'm going to mispronounce this, the Winta Wasatch Cache National Forests. Overlanders avoiding high altitude meadows, especially during spring, it helps to protect the vegetation recovery in those areas. So the D is do your part. Pack out everything you bring in and even pick up trash left by others. And you want to, again, drive like there are 500 rigs lined up behind you. Volunteer for trail cleanups or restoration days. So an example of this would be there's an adopt a trail program in just about every state where local off-roading groups take responsibility for maintaining specific routes. And you can find some of these, and they're more than welcome to get more volunteers to go along with them. Any all hands help. And participating in some of these adopted trail programs can help minimize some of the trash that's on these things and keep them sustainable for us. There's organizations, Venture Unknown. They actually run a trail cleanup events, and they've collected almost 75,000 pounds of trash since they've been doing this. There are a number of off-road groups, and you can find them on Facebook. A lot of them run trail cleanup days, and getting involved in these is a great way to help preserve access to some of these trails. And you can find out more about the Tread Lightly principles at www.treadlightly.org. That's www.treadlightly, all one word.org. And I'm going to have a link, of course, in the show notes. At a minimum, go to Tread Lightly, and they have a class where you can get a certification for the Tread Lightly certification. It's free. The test and the certification is free. But I also highly recommend checking out the benefits of personal membership for Tread Lightly. This organization is doing really good work out there. And you want to browse the website and learn about other ways to help with trail conservation, and how to keep trails open for recreation and overlanding. You also want to look at joining local conservation and trail maintenance groups. So there are some other groups like there's one called the Blue Ribbon Coalition. They lobby Congress for funding for trail restoration and maintenance. They're very active in that. And this is crucial. The funding for these things is a crucial aspect of keeping many of these routes open to the public because a lot of the times when these when you have these trail closures, it's because the park service or the local the local government entity that's responsible for maintaining these areas, they simply run out of funding. They don't have the funding and the manpower to be able to go out and keep these places in a natural state. If they don't have the funding, if they don't have the people to maintain it, the only thing that they're left with, the only arrow left in their quiver is to just close these things down. But in addition to these national organizations, there are a ton of overlanding and off road groups out there. You can find them on Facebook groups. Locate one for your area that puts together a trail cleanup ride and turn out for one. You will get to meet other people with the same interests as you and who care about doing this stuff sustainably, but you'll also get to make some new friends, and people being willing to go out and do these trail cleanups is crucial to being able to keep these routes open for people to enjoy. Listen, no matter how much people like me or Tread Lightly or others try to preach the gospel of being more responsible in our use of wilderness areas, there are going to still be people who go out to these places and leave behind trash, graffiti, they cut down trees, you name it. It's not going to be enough for us to be responsible in our own practices. People absolutely have to be willing to go out there and clean up after the ones who don't. This is all just a big downhill slide if we're only looking after our own practices. But speaking of our own practices, what are some of the things that we can do to improve our own practices while we're out there enjoying these places? This gets us into leave no trace principles. Now, leave no trace means leaving the places you visit in exactly or as close as possible, or possibly even better than how it was when you got there. And this means packing out all of our waste and any waste we encounter along our routes and in our campsites. Just keep a roll of trash bags in the rig and get into the habit of just picking up stuff when you encounter it. You may see a discarded soda bottle by the side of the trail or a pile of half burnt trash in the fire ring in your camp. If you make picking this up and bagging it part of your camp setup ritual, it's not going to be there for the next person to deal with. It only adds a few minutes to your camp setup and it makes a huge difference. Here's a big one. Only camp in established campsites. When you're going down most of the Forest Service roads that allow dispersed camping, you'll see pull offs to either side of the road, and most of these already established campsites are going to already have a fire ring present in them. Stick to these rather than pulling off into a pristine area and building out a new campsite. Firing scars do heal eventually, but it can take years, and for all intents and purposes, they're a permanent scar on the landscape, so just don't do that. If an area you're traveling in doesn't permit dispersed camping, and this circles back to what I said previously about knowing the regulations for an area, there will be several campgrounds in the area to serve that purpose. Hey, there's no shame in spending a night in a state park campground. You still get to keep your mountain man card. And as a bonus, you'll have an actual bathroom to use, no having to take a shovel out with you at 2 a.m. to dig a hole. And hey, while we're on the subject of, poo that is, this is another form of waste that's becoming increasingly difficult to deal with since the rise in popularity of overlanding and outdoor recreation. I mean, when God speaks to you, you gotta go. But if everybody's just dropping trow behind the nearest bush, things can get a little icky out there. I'm going to be doing an episode coming up where I talk about doing number two in the great outdoors, but I think we've come to a point where the population density in these places on the average weekend has gotten to where we pretty much have to pack that waste out with us as well. Yuck, I know. But there are ways to civilize this process that fit just fine in the average overlanding setup, and that's going to be a conversation that deserves more time than I have left on this episode. Speaking of waste, make sure your vehicle isn't leaving behind any as well. This gets into just plain making sure you're maintaining your rig and ensuring that there aren't any oil or gasoline or other fluid leaks coming from it. Petroleum products like gas can contaminate water in concentrations as low as a few parts per billion. So be sure we're not leaving that behind when we travel out in nature. Just a couple of other things that you can do to help keep our parks, forests, and trails open for everyone to use. The first is to be an advocate to others around you. Kind of like I'm doing right now. Even if you don't have your own Overland podcast, you can still advocate for better use of our natural resources just person to person. Post that shiny new Tread Lightly certificate to your social media profiles. I mean, you are planning to go out and get that after listening to this, right? I did mention that it's free, right? Also, if you're out camping or running trails with friends, or someone posts about their weekend trip in one of your Facebook groups and you see that they did something completely sketch, hey, say something. This doesn't mean that you have to go full Karen on someone in a forum because they tossed a plastic bottle into the campfire. Maybe post about your weekend and highlight the tread lightly principles that you followed. Lead by example. They just may not be aware, is all it is, and share your love and knowledge for the great outdoors. These practices only spread when someone cares enough to open their mouth and say something. Let's see, what else have I got in my notes here? I've already talked about looking for trail cleanup rides in your area and joining in on those. But hey, it bears mentioning again. If you have a cleanup ride that you're planning on going on, hey, consider inviting one of your friends or family to come along with you. The trash cleanup days are one of those things where many hands make for light work. So they'll usually welcome the extra help. And you don't know who that friend or your family member may go on to talk to about their experience. It's kind of a Mandela effect, you know? So you can also stay informed about legislation that impacts access to public lands and off-road trails. Write your congressman and encourage them to support balanced policy solutions that prioritize both recreation and conservation, and more importantly, to provide adequate funding for trail maintenance. The organization I mentioned before, the I can't even say it. The Blue Ribbon Coalition has an up-to-date information on policy concerns. That's kind of their wheelhouse. But mostly just know how to be a part of the solution rather than being a part of the problem. Little things really do add up. We all want to keep our parks, forests, and trails open and thriving for future generations, and it's up to each of us to take care of them. Well, that's my podcast for the week. If you've listened this far, I really hope that you've added another New Year's resolution to your list. And I hope that this one sticks longer than the one to not buy so many Starbucks coffees. Also, if you're still here, you see that like and follow button over there? Yeah, there. Move your finger or your mouse right over there and click it. Listen, don't listen, but the follows really help out my channel. Well, I mean, I do hope you'll listen. I put in a fair amount of work each week to try to put out a quality podcast for you. But if there's something that you'd like to hear, not hear, topics, suggestions, whatever, my inbox is always open. You can share your thoughts by heading over to www.dirtroadtourist.com and hitting the Contact Us link at the top. It's also a good launching pad to find the show because there's a button right there to take you to it on Apple Podcasts. You can also send an email to ken@dirtroadtourist.com. That's ken@dirtroadtourist, all one word.com. I want to thank you for listening, and be sure to join me back here next Monday for another episode of the Dirt Road Tourist. As always, have a great week. Go see something amazing.